What if I told you that the 30 seconds you spend each morning scrolling through your phone could instead be used to permanently break free from the suffocating cycle of borrowing money? I know that sounds almost impossible, especially if you've spent years caught in that trap of financial dependency. But stay with me here, because what you're about to discover has transformed the lives of thousands of people who once felt exactly the way you might be feeling right now. Think about the last time you had to ask someone for money. Do you remember that feeling? The way your heart started pounding before you even typed the first word. The way your hands trembled as you wrote and deleted the message over and over again, trying to find the right words that wouldn't make you sound desperate. That moment when you finally pressed send and immediately felt that wave of shame wash over you, wondering how you ended up in this situation again. Has this ever happened to you? If you're nodding your head right now, I want you to know that you're not alone, and more importantly, this pattern can be broken starting today. Dr. Joseph Murphy, one of the greatest minds in understanding the power of the subconscious mind and financial prosperity, discovered something remarkable that prosperous individuals have practiced for generations but rarely talk about publicly. It's a simple yet profoundly powerful morning practice that takes just 30 seconds. No complicated rituals, no expensive courses, no mystical ceremonies. Just 3 sentences spoken at a very specific time each day that can completely rewire your relationship with money at the deepest psychological level. But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future videos. Now here's what most people don't understand about financial struggle. The real problem isn't actually the lack of money itself. I know that might sound strange when you're staring at an empty bank account or a pile of bills, but the truth is that debt and dependency are born from something much deeper, something that happens in those critical first moments after you wake up each morning. You see, every time you open your mouth to ask for money, you think you're just solving a temporary problem. But what's really happening is that you're sending a powerful signal to your subconscious mind, a signal that says, "I cannot provide for myself." And when that signal gets repeated over and over, month after month, year after year, it creates an invisible mental pattern that keeps pulling you back into the same cycle no matter how hard you work. What you're about to discover might surprise you because it goes against everything you've been taught about money and success. This isn't about working harder or finding a better job or waiting for some lucky break. This is about understanding that your morning words are actually programming your financial reality in ways you've never been taught to recognize. Think about this for a moment. In the exact amount of time it takes you to let out that anxious sigh before typing a message asking to borrow money, you could instead speak something so powerful that it begins to close the door on debt and swing open the door to a completely different kind of provision. 30 seconds, that's all we're talking about here. Not 30 minutes of meditation, not some hour-long ritual that requires you to wake up at dawn with candles and incense. Just 30 seconds that could mark the turning point between a life of financial dependency and a life of genuine abundance. Now, I know what you might be thinking right now. You've probably heard about affirmations before. Maybe you've even tried them and felt like they didn't work. Maybe you stood in front of a mirror telling yourself you're wealthy while your bank account was screaming the opposite, and it just felt empty and fake. I completely understand that skepticism because here's the hidden truth that most people miss. It's not just about what you say, it's about when you say it and how those words interact with your subconscious mind during that critical window of opportunity. Dr. Joseph Murphy spent decades researching the mechanics of the subconscious mind and financial consciousness, and what he discovered was revolutionary. There's a specific moment each day when your mind is in a unique state, a state where it's incredibly receptive to new programming, where the barriers between your conscious thoughts and your deeper beliefs are at their thinnest. This moment happens right after you wake up, before you've fully transitioned into your everyday thinking patterns, before you've checked your phone, before you've let the worries of the day flood in. In that precious window, your subconscious is essentially waiting for instructions on how to operate for the next 24 hours. And here's where the real transformation happens. This practice I'm sharing with you isn't some complicated spiritual ceremony that requires years of study or special knowledge. It's 3 sentences. That's it. 3 carefully constructed sentences that, when spoken in that morning window, begin to reprogram the deepest patterns in your mind around money, worthiness, and provision. You don't need to understand quantum physics or ancient wisdom traditions. You don't need to fast or make lifelong vows or change your entire lifestyle. You just need to be willing to give 30 seconds of your morning to something different than what you've been doing, because what you've been doing has led you to where you are right now. If this resonates with you, subscribe to the channel right now. This is where we dive into principles that actually transform your financial reality, not just temporary motivation. The beauty of this practice lies in its simplicity, but don't mistake simplicity for weakness. Some of the most powerful forces in nature are elegantly simple. Water flowing downhill will eventually carve through solid rock, not through complexity, but through consistent directed pressure over time. That's exactly what these 30 seconds do. They create a new groove in your consciousness, a new pathway that your thoughts about money can flow through. And with each morning that you practice this, that pathway becomes deeper, stronger, more automatic. Now I want to go even deeper into why this specific timing matters so much, and what's actually happening in your brain during those first moments of consciousness. You see, when you wake up, your brain is transitioning from theta waves to alpha waves, and this transition creates what neuroscientists call a hypnagogic state. In this state, your critical faculty, that part of your mind that constantly judges and filters information, is still mostly offline. This means that whatever you feed your mind during these moments doesn't get argued with or doubted. It goes straight into your subconscious programming. Most people waste this precious state by immediately grabbing their phone and filling their mind with emails, news, social media, all the external chaos that tells them they're not enough. They don't have enough. They need to be worried. But what if instead you claimed those 30 seconds for yourself, for your financial transformation, for breaking free from patterns that have held you hostage? This is the decision point that separates those who transform their financial reality from those who stay stuck in the same cycles year after year. It's not about your income level, your education, or your circumstances. It's about whether you're willing to take control of the most powerful moment of your day and use it intentionally. Write in the comments, "I'm ready for this transformation." And here's where the real magic of this practice reveals itself. The key is in the sequence, in the order of operations that most people get completely backwards. Think about what you do right now when you wake up. Your eyes open, and within seconds, maybe even before your feet touch the floor, your hand is reaching for your phone. You're checking messages, scrolling through notifications, and almost inevitably, you're looking at your bank balance with that familiar knot forming in your stomach. That discouraging number stares back at you, and before you've even fully woken up, fear has already taken residence in your mind for the day. This is the pattern that keeps you trapped. But what if you flipped that script entirely? What if, before your hand ever touched that phone, before you gave fear permission to dictate your emotional state, before you allowed that bank balance to define your worth for the next 24 hours, you stood up and spoke those 3 sentences? This isn't just some feel-good strategy. This is about claiming authority over your own mental space before the world rushes in to tell you who you are and what you lack. When you make this practice non-negotiable, when you protect those 30 seconds as sacred time before anything else enters your consciousness, something measurable begins to shift in the flow of provision around you. Now, I need to be crystal clear about something because I don't want you to misunderstand what I'm saying here. This isn't about sitting on your couch speaking these words and then passively waiting for money to magically appear in your mailbox. That's not how this works, and anyone who tells you otherwise is selling you fantasy. What actually happens is far more interesting and far more powerful. When you reset your morning frequency through this practice, when you program your subconscious with a message of provision rather than lack, you become a different kind of person energetically and mentally. You start noticing opportunities that were always there, but that your scarcity mindset had blinded you to. Doors begin opening in ways that feel almost uncanny in their timing. Let me paint you a picture of what this looks like in real life. Maybe it's a customer you haven't heard from in months who suddenly calls with a project. Maybe it's a conversation at the grocery store that turns into a collaboration opportunity no one could have predicted. Maybe it's an idea that hits you. In the shower, an idea so clear and actionable that when you implement it, it creates an entirely new revenue stream. These aren't coincidences. These are the natural results of aligning your internal state with abundance, rather than desperation. When you're operating from desperation, people can sense it. Opportunities repel away from you, and you make decisions from fear rather than wisdom. But when you've anchored yourself each morning in a consciousness of provision, you move through the world differently. You speak differently, you show up differently, and the world responds to that difference. This is the hidden truth about financial transformation that no one talks about in those get-rich-quick schemes or money manifestation courses. Real change doesn't come from external manipulation. It comes from internal revolution, from making a decision each morning about who you're going to be before the day has a chance to tell you who you should be. The journey from financial anxiety to genuine abundance isn't a straight line, but it starts with this single pivot point, this choice to claim your morning as your own. Write in the comments, "I choose abundance today." What I'm about to share with you might sound radical, but I need you to really absorb this because it's the core of everything. Your financial reality isn't actually determined by your job, your education, or even the economy. It's determined by your identity, by the person you believe yourself to be when you first open your eyes each morning. Right now, if you're stuck in that borrowing cycle, you're waking up each day as someone who thinks, here we go again, another day of being short, another day of struggling, another day of not having enough. That's not just a thought. That's an identity, and your subconscious mind, which controls about 95% of your daily behaviors and decisions, takes that identity as an instruction manual for how to operate. But imagine something completely different. Imagine waking up tomorrow morning and instead of immediately slipping into that familiar costume of lack, you stand up and declare with your own voice, "Today I am a channel of abundant provision." Not as a hope, not as a wish, but as a statement of fact about who you are. This isn't playing pretend or lying to yourself. This is about understanding that identity is a choice, not a fixed reality. You weren't born with a label stamped on your forehead that says, "financially struggling person." That identity was constructed over time through repetition, through the stories you've told yourself, through the words you've spoken every single morning. And here's the revelation that changes everything. If that identity was constructed, it can be deconstructed and rebuilt. The shift from "I'm someone who's always short" to "I'm a channel of provision" might seem like just semantics, like we're playing word games here, but the impact on your neural pathways is profound. Your brain literally cannot tell the difference between a vividly imagined reality and an actual one. When you declare a new identity with conviction, especially in that receptive morning state, your subconscious begins reorganizing your perception, your attention, and your actions to align with that declaration. You start seeing possibilities that were invisible before. You start having conversations you would have avoided. You start making decisions from a place of empowerment rather than desperation. And here's what I need you to understand with absolute clarity. That cycle you've been trapped in, those 3 a.m. nights lying awake in anxiety, that awful feeling of avoiding people because you owe them money, that humiliating mental loop of, who can I ask this time and what excuse sounds believable? All of that can end right here, right now. In this moment if you make the decision. Not tomorrow when you feel more ready. Not next week when things calm down. Not next month when you think you'll have more willpower. Now, because every day you delay is another day of programming that old identity deeper into your mind, another day of that neural pathway getting stronger, another day of opportunities passing by that you can't see because you're looking through the lens of lack. The decision to break free isn't something that happens when conditions are perfect. It happens when you decide that staying the same is no longer acceptable, when the pain of remaining stuck becomes greater than the fear of change, when you finally say enough is enough and claim a different story for your life. Write in the comments, I'm breaking the cycle now. Now let me share something with you that might give you the evidence you need to truly believe this is possible for you too. I've witnessed this transformation in real people, not celebrities or business moguls, but ordinary individuals just like you and me. I'm talking about construction workers who were borrowing $300 every month just to cover rent. Single mothers working 2 jobs who still came up short on school fees and had to ask family members for help with that familiar sense of shame burning in their chest. Office workers with decent salaries who somehow always needed to borrow $100 here, $200 there, just to make it through the month. Small shop owners who were one bad week away from having to close their doors and ask for money just to keep the lights on. These weren't people with character, flaws, or laziness problems. They were hard-working, responsible individuals who had simply been caught in an invisible web. A pattern that kept repeating no matter how hard they tried to escape it. And then something shifted. They started practicing this 30-second morning declaration with genuine consistency. And I want to emphasize this because it's crucial. There were no lottery tickets involved, no rich relatives passing away and leaving them inheritance, no sudden lucky breaks or magical interventions where cash just appeared out of nowhere. What happened was far more profound and sustainable than any of that. What changed was a habit, a simple, deliberate habit of speaking 3 specific sentences every single morning before doing anything else. 7 days turned into 21 days. 21 days turned into 40 days. And somewhere along that journey, their internal wiring started to shift. The people who once couldn't make it through a month without borrowing gradually became people who not only stopped needing to ask for money, but actually found themselves in positions where they could help others who were struggling the same way they once had. That's the real measure of transformation, when you go from being the one who needs rescue to being the one who can extend a hand to someone else. This didn't happen because they suddenly got promoted or won contracts worth millions. It happened because their relationship with money fundamentally changed at the identity level. They stopped operating from scarcity and started operating from a consciousness of provision. And when that internal shift occurs, your external reality has no choice but to reorganize itself to match. Opportunities that were always there but invisible suddenly become clear. Decisions that you would have made from fear and desperation get made from wisdom and clarity instead. Conversations happen differently. Relationships shift. The energy you bring into every interaction changes, and people respond to that energy in ways that open doors you didn't even know existed. The beauty of this approach is in its accessibility. You don't need special circumstances or perfect conditions to start. You just need to commit to those 30 seconds every morning and trust the process enough to stay consistent through the critical threshold periods of 7 days, 21 days, and 40 days. This is where most people fail, not because the practice doesn't work, but because they give up before the neural pathways have had time to solidify. Write in the comments, "I commit to 40 days." Understanding why people get stuck in borrowing cycles is essential, because without this insight you might blame yourself for something that was never really about your character or work ethic in the first place. The individuals I've seen transform weren't lazy. They weren't irresponsible with money. They weren't making poor decisions out of carelessness. They were caught in something far more insidious, an invisible pattern that operates below the level of conscious awareness. Here's how it works. The first time you borrow money, it feels terrible, embarrassing, like a failure. But you get through it, and that temporary relief creates a neural pathway. The second time becomes slightly easier because your brain recognizes the pattern. The third time, easier still. And before you realize what's happening, borrowing has become your default solution to financial pressure. The more you borrow, the more dependent you become on that external rescue. The more dependent you become, the weaker your internal sense of financial capability feels. And the weaker you feel, the easier it becomes to ask again, because you've already crossed that threshold of dignity so many times that it doesn't sting quite as much anymore. This is the trap. It's not about the money itself. It's about the pattern slowly rewiring your identity from someone who solves problems to someone who needs to be saved from them. Breaking this pattern requires more than just willpower or a sudden influx of cash. It requires interrupting the cycle at its source, which is the mental and emotional programming that runs automatically every single morning. What fascinates me most about this practice is its historical depth. Dr. Joseph Murphy didn't invent these principles out of thin air. He studied wisdom that has been carefully preserved and passed down through generations of prosperous families for literally thousands of years. We're talking about practices that have survived wars, economic collapses, cultural upheavals, and every kind of adversity imaginable. These families didn't advertise their methods on billboards or social media. They didn't write best-selling books about their secrets. They quietly practiced certain morning rituals related to money, dignity, and provision. And the results spoke for themselves in ways that were undeniable, yet often invisible to outsiders. Think about what that means for a moment. While most of the world was taught to work harder, save more, and hope for the best, there was a smaller group of people who understood something deeper about how financial reality actually gets created. They knew that prosperity isn't just about external actions, it's about internal alignment. They knew that what you declare about yourself in those sacred morning moments has more power than how many hours you work or how much you sacrifice. And they protected this knowledge, passed it down carefully, used it generation after generation to rebuild wealth even when everything external was taken from them. The revelation here is that this wisdom isn't locked away anymore. You don't need to be born into these families or discover some hidden manuscript. The principles are accessible right now, and the practice is simple enough that anyone can begin immediately. Write in the comments, "I'm claiming this wisdom." What's truly remarkable when you look at history through this lens is how certain communities faced absolute devastation, had everything stripped away from them, endured exile, war, persecution, complete financial ruin, and yet within a generation or two, they rebuilt extraordinary wealth. How is that possible? How do people lose everything and then rise again, stronger than before, while others who've never faced such hardship remain stuck in cycles of lack, for their entire lives. The difference isn't in external circumstances or lucky breaks. The difference is in a fundamental understanding of how wealth is actually created, and it starts with what you do with your mouth. These resilient communities understood something that most people today have completely forgotten. They knew that your mouth has two possible functions when it comes to money. You can use it to beg, to lower yourself, to ask for rescue, to declare your inadequacy, or you can use it to declare provision, to stand upright in your dignity, to speak independence into existence. Most people have been trained their entire lives to use their mouth in the first way. When pressure comes, when bills pile up, when things get tight, the automatic response is to reach out with words of need, words of desperation, words that reinforce the identity of someone who cannot provide for themselves. But the people who rebuilt empires from ashes used their mouths differently. They declared abundance even when surrounded by rubble. They spoke provision even when their pockets were empty. They used language as a creative force rather than as a tool of surrender. This practice isn't about denying reality or pretending everything is fine when it's not. It's about understanding that financial dignity is your birthright, not a privilege reserved for those born into wealth or those who got lucky with timing. Dr. Murphy's research into these ancient principles revealed something profound. Every single person, regardless of their starting point, has the inherent right to financial dignity. But that right must be claimed, it must be activated, and the activation happens through your willingness to stand upright, open your mouth, and declare independence from the pattern of borrowing, begging, and lowering yourself. Think about what it means to stand upright. It's not just a physical posture, it's a mental and spiritual posture. It's refusing to bow down to circumstances. It's refusing to accept that you're somehow less worthy of provision than anyone else. It's recognizing that the same creative power that built fortunes for others is available to you right now, in this moment, waiting to be activated by your declaration. The revelation here is that you're not asking permission from the universe or from some external authority. You're claiming what's already yours by right of your existence as a conscious being with the power to speak your reality into form. This shifts everything because it means you're no longer waiting to be rescued or hoping someone will give you a break. You're stepping into the role of creator of your own financial experience, and that role begins every single morning with the words you choose to speak before anything else enters your consciousness. Write in the comments, "I claim my dignity now." Now I need you to really sit with something uncomfortable for a moment, because this awareness is where the real breakthrough begins. Every time you've opened your mouth to ask someone for money, you thought you were just solving a temporary cash flow problem. You needed to cover rent, pay a bill, get through the week. It seemed practical, even necessary. But here's what was actually happening at a level you couldn't see. You were making a declaration to your subconscious mind, and that declaration said, "I cannot manage my own life. I am not capable of providing for myself. I need someone else to rescue me." Now, before you feel defensive or ashamed about this, understand that I'm not saying this to make you feel bad. I'm saying it so you can finally see the invisible mechanism that's been running your financial reality. Your subconscious doesn't judge these declarations as good or bad. It simply accepts them as truth and then organizes your entire neurological system to make that truth consistent. So when you repeatedly declare through your actions and words that you cannot manage, your brain starts looking for evidence to support that belief. It filters out opportunities that would contradict it. It guides you towards situations that confirm it. It creates a self-fulfilling prophecy, where the more you borrow, the more you become someone who borrows, and the more you become someone who borrows, the more circumstances arise that require you to borrow again. This is the binding power of words, and most people have no idea they're doing this to themselves. But here's where hope enters the picture. And it's not just wishful thinking hope, but actual, tangible, scientifically valid hope. The same mechanism that bound you can set you free. If your mouth speaking words of dependency created a reality of debt, then your mouth speaking words of provision can create a reality of abundance. This isn't metaphorical. This is how the human nervous system actually works. Your words, especially those spoken in heightened emotional states or in that receptive morning consciousness, literally program your reticular activating system, the part of your brain that determines what you pay attention to and what you ignore in your environment. When you shift from speaking dependency to declaring provision, you're not just being positive or trying to trick yourself into feeling better. You're actually rewiring the filtering system that determines what opportunities you notice, what connections you make, what ideas come to you, and how other people perceive and respond to you. This is the hidden power that's been available to you all along. You've been using your mouth as a creative tool your entire life, but you've been creating the wrong reality because no one taught you how this actually works. The moment you take conscious control of this process, the moment you decide that your morning words will be declarations of provision rather than unconscious confirmations of lack, everything begins to shift. Write in the comments, "My words create my reality." Before we go any further, I want to make something absolutely clear, because your level of commitment will determine whether this works for you or becomes just another thing you tried once and abandoned. This isn't a casual experiment. This isn't something you do for 3 days to see if money magically appears and then give up when it doesn't happen on your timeline. This is a journey to restore something that's been taken from you, something you may not have even realized was missing, your financial dignity. And that restoration requires a different level of commitment than you've brought to most things in your life. Think about it this way. You didn't develop your current financial patterns overnight. They were built layer by layer, word by word, decision by decision, over months and years, and maybe even decades. Those neural pathways are deep and well-worn. So when you decide to create new pathways, when you decide to reprogram your subconscious relationship with money, you're not flipping a light switch. You're building new roads in your brain, and roads get built through repetition, through showing up consistently, through refusing to quit when the old patterns try to pull you back. This is why having a daily reminder system becomes absolutely essential. Your environment is designed to pull you back into old patterns. Your phone notifications want to drag you into anxiety. Your bank balance wants to define your worth. The people around you who are comfortable with you staying small will unconsciously try to keep you there, without a deliberate system to remind yourself each day of who you're becoming. Without something that anchors you back to this new identity you're building, the gravitational pull of the old life becomes overwhelming. You need something that wakes you up every morning and says, you were not born to be a slave to debt. You were not created to live with your head down in shame, avoiding eye contact with people you owe money to. You were designed to walk tall in provision, to be a conduit through which abundance flows not just to you, but through you to others. This isn't motivational fluff. This is the truth about your nature that's been buried under layers of conditioning and disappointment and repeated failures. The daily reminder system isn't about pumping yourself up with fake positivity. It's about maintaining the new mental patterns long enough for them to become automatic, for them to replace the old programming that's been running your life. Dr. Murphy understood that transformation happens in the gap between decision and integration. You can make a powerful decision right now to change, but if you don't have a structure to support that decision through the messy middle part where nothing seems to be working yet, you'll fall back into default patterns within days. The daily reinforcement is what carries you across that gap until the new way of being becomes natural. Write in the comments, I'm building new patterns. So right now, in this exact moment, I want you to pause and ask yourself a question that might be uncomfortable but absolutely necessary. Are you willing to live another full year the way you've been living? Are you willing to spend the next 3 years, maybe even 5 years, continuing to send those borrowing messages with shaking hands? Are you willing to keep having those awkward phone calls where you try to sound casual while asking for money? Are you willing to keep experiencing those sleepless nights at 3 in the morning, staring at the ceiling, running through the mental list of who you could possibly ask next, and what excuse might sound believable this time? If the answer that's rising up in your chest right now is no, if you feel that resistance, that anger, that exhaustion with the current pattern, then that feeling is actually your signal to commit. Not to think about it, not to wait until you feel more prepared or more worthy, or until your circumstances improve. Your circumstances will never improve until you make this commitment, because the commitment is what triggers the improvement, not the other way around. This is the backwards thinking that keeps people trapped for decades. They wait for conditions to be right before they change their internal state, but the internal state is what creates the conditions. Every single morning when you open your eyes, you're not just starting another 24-hour cycle. You're literally restarting the financial destiny of your entire life. That sounds dramatic, but it's neurologically accurate. Your brain doesn't carry over yesterday's momentum automatically. It resets during sleep, and when you wake up, there's a fresh opportunity to program the direction of your thoughts, emotions, and ultimately your actions for that day. And those daily directions compound over time into the trajectory of your entire financial reality. Just 30 seconds. That's the difference between someone who stays stuck in borrowing cycles for years and someone who breaks free and eventually becomes a source of provision for others. 30 seconds of conscious declaration in that sacred morning window can place you into an entirely different stream of provision. Not because the words are magic spells, but because they align your frequency, your attention, your energy, and your actions with abundance instead of lack. When you're vibrating at the frequency of provision, you notice different things. You have different conversations. You make different choices. You show up differently in every interaction. And the world responds to that difference in ways that feel almost miraculous, but are actually just the natural consequence of internal alignment. This is the turning point where most people either step fully into transformation or let fear talk them back into familiar misery. The decision you make right here will echo through every morning for the rest of your life. Write in the comments, "I choose transformation today." Let me paint you a picture of what tomorrow morning could look like if you actually implement this. Your eyes open. Instead of that automatic reach for your phone, instead of that familiar sigh as you remember the bills waiting for you, instead of letting anxiety flood your nervous system before you've even taken 3 conscious breaths, you do something radically different. You get up, you walk to the window, you let that first light of the day touch your face, and in that moment of connection between you and the new day, you open your mouth and declare 3 sentences that shift the entire financial direction of not just that day, but your week, your month, and ultimately your life. This simple act, this deliberate choice to claim your morning before the world claims it for you, is what separates people who transform from people who stay stuck while reading about transformation. It's not complicated. It doesn't require an hour of meditation or some elaborate ritual with candles and incense. It's just you, the morning light, and your willingness to speak a new reality into existence before the old reality has a chance to reassert itself through notifications, news, and the chorus of voices telling you what's wrong and what's lacking. What's happening in this practice goes deeper than positive thinking or motivational psychology. You're actually activating a frequency, and I know that might sound abstract or mystical, but stay with me because this is grounded in observable reality. Everything in the universe, including your thoughts, emotions, and words, operates at specific frequencies. When you're stuck in borrowing patterns, you're vibrating at the frequency of lack, of need, of desperation. That frequency is like a radio signal that attracts circumstances, people, and situations that match it. It's why people who are desperate for money tend to repel it. Why opportunities seem to evaporate the more anxiously you chase them. But when you deliberately shift your frequency through conscious morning declaration, when you align your mind, your words, and your energy field in the direction of provision rather than lack, something remarkable happens. You become a different kind of magnetic presence in the world. This isn't about tricking the universe or using some secret mental hack to get rich quick. It's about understanding that money, like everything else, flows towards certain frequencies and away from others. When you align yourself with the frequency of provision, when you genuinely embody the consciousness of someone who is a channel for abundance rather than a victim of scarcity, money begins finding pathways to you that your desperate mind could never have strategized or forced. This is the invisible mechanism behind why some people seem to effortlessly attract opportunities while others work themselves to exhaustion and still struggle. It's not luck, it's frequency alignment. Write in the comments, "I'm aligning my frequency." I need to give you fair warning about what happens when you actually commit to this. Practice, because once you cross this threshold, there's no going back to being the person you were before. I'm not saying that to be dramatic. I'm saying it because the transformation that occurs when you consistently practice this morning declaration is profound and permanent. You cannot unknow what you're about to learn. You cannot unsee the patterns once they become visible. And you cannot remain the same identity once you've activated a new one through daily repetition. Some people find that exciting. Others find it terrifying. Both reactions are valid, but neither should stop you from moving forward. The person who wakes up tomorrow and begins this practice will be fundamentally different from the person who finishes 40 days of it. Your friends might notice something has changed but won't be able to name it. Your family might comment that you seem different, lighter, more confident. People who used to approach you for money might stop asking because they sense a shift in your energy. Opportunities that never came your way before will start appearing, not because the world changed, but because you changed and the world is simply reflecting that back to you. But here's what most people don't realize is happening every single morning that keeps them trapped. The alarm goes off, eyes open, and within 10 seconds, maybe even 5, their hand is reaching for their phone. They check messages, they scroll through social media, and almost inevitably, they check their bank balance. That number pops up on the screen, and if it's lower than they hoped, which it usually is, a wave of anxiety washes through their entire nervous system. Their stomach tightens, their breathing becomes shallow, and in that moment, they've just planted scarcity into their subconscious mind before they've even gotten out of bed. This is the invisible habit that programs your brain to live in lack, to brace for struggle, to expect that today will be just another day of not having enough. And your brain, brilliant and loyal as it is, says, "Okay, you've told me we're in scarcity mode. Let me help you by making sure you see all the evidence that supports that belief. Let me filter out anything that contradicts it. Let me keep you safe by keeping you small." Within the first 10 seconds of your day, you've set the entire trajectory toward more of what you don't want. The practice I'm sharing with you interrupts this pattern at its root. It claims those critical first moments. Before fear can establish its foothold, it programs provision instead of lack. And when you do this consistently, the person you've been cannot coexist with the person you're becoming. Write in the comments, "I'm becoming someone new." What neuroscience has confirmed in recent decades is something that ancient practitioners knew intuitively for thousands of years. Your brain doesn't just passively receive information in the morning. It reacts with extraordinary intensity to whatever you say, think, and feel during those first moments of consciousness. Every word you speak after waking is essentially a command being sent directly to your nervous system, a command that tells your entire biological and psychological operating system whether you're someone who lacks or someone who's provided for, whether you're in danger or in abundance, whether you need to contract in fear or expand in possibility. This isn't metaphorical language. When you speak words of lack, your amygdala activates. Cortisol floods your system, your body goes into stress response, and your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for creative problem-solving and opportunity recognition, literally shuts down. You're biologically incapable of seeing solutions when you're in that state. But when you speak words of provision, when you declare abundance before fear has a chance to hijack your nervous system, you activate completely different neural networks. Your brain releases dopamine and serotonin. Your body relaxes, your awareness expands, and suddenly you're able to perceive opportunities and connections that were invisible just moments before. This is why the practice I'm sharing with you has survived for over 3,000 years across different cultures and contexts. It didn't endure because it's mystical or magical. It endured because it works at the fundamental level of human psychology, energy, and spiritual structure. When something addresses all three of those dimensions simultaneously, when it strikes at the core of what makes us human and how we interface with reality, it transcends temporary trends and becomes timeless wisdom. Dr. Murphy studied these principles not as abstract philosophy, but as practical technology for reshaping your relationship with every aspect of life, especially money. He understood that most people fail financially, not because they lack intelligence or work ethic, but because they've never been taught how to program their subconscious mind intentionally. They're running default programming that was installed by parents, society, past failures, and repeated disappointments. And that programming runs automatically every morning unless you consciously interrupt it with something more powerful. The 3 sentences you're about to learn aren't random positive affirmations pulled from thin air. They're precision-engineered declarations designed to rewire your identity at the deepest level, to shift your frequency from lack to provision, and to activate the part of your consciousness that attracts wealth rather than repelling it. This is the convergence of ancient wisdom and modern neuroscience, and it's available to you right now. Write in the comments, "I'm ready to reprogram." There's a pattern you'll notice if you study families that have maintained wealth across generations, people who seem to navigate financial challenges with a different kind of ease than most. They guard their mornings like sacred territory. They never, and I mean never, allow the first moments of their day to be hijacked by fear, worry, or the mental chaos that most people accept as normal. They don't wake up and immediately start rehearsing their problems. They don't let their minds slip into scarcity mode before they've even had their first conscious thought. They don't begin the day with "not enough" running through their internal dialogue. This isn't because they have less to worry about. Often they have more complex financial situations than the average person, but they understand something crucial about how reality gets constructed. They know that the morning is when the foundation gets laid for everything that follows, and they refuse to build that foundation on anxiety and lack. Instead, they have deliberate practices, rituals that might look simple from the outside, but are actually sophisticated psychological technology designed to program their consciousness for abundance before the day has a chance to program them for scarcity. Think of your morning words as programming commands in the operating system of your life. When you boot up a computer, the first commands that run determine how everything else functions for that entire session. Your mind works the same way. If you enter the day with the right command, if you speak provision and abundance and worthiness into your consciousness before anything else, your reticular activating system, your attention filters, your decision-making, processes, all of it aligns to receive the right opportunities. You become attuned to possibilities that match that frequency. But if you start with the wrong command, if you let scarcity and fear and "here we go again" be the first programming that runs, then scarcity will find you throughout the day, not as punishment from the universe, but as natural consequence of what you've instructed your mind to look for and expect. Your brain is incredibly loyal. It will always prove you right. If you tell it you're lacking, it will show you evidence of lack everywhere. If you tell it you're provided for, it will start revealing provision in places you never noticed before. This is why changing your morning routine isn't just a nice idea or a self-help suggestion. It's a fundamental restructuring of how you interface with financial reality. When you protect those first 30 seconds and use them to install the right programming, you're not just being positive. You're being strategic with the most powerful tool you have, your conscious choice about what goes into your mind first. Write in the comments, "I'm installing new programming." There's a principle that operates with absolute consistency in human experience, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. What you speak with conviction, you will eventually see manifested in your reality. What you declare about yourself consistently, you will become. This isn't wishful thinking or spiritual bypassing. This is observable cause and effect playing out in the realm of consciousness and physical experience. Your words aren't just sounds that disappear into the air. They're creative forces that shape your identity, your perception, and ultimately the circumstances that surround you. When you practice this 30-second morning declaration, you're sending a signal that ripples through every level of your being. You're announcing to your subconscious, to your energy field, to the universe itself, that you are no longer the one who begs. You're no longer the person who lowers themselves to ask for rescue. You're stepping into a completely different identity, the identity of someone who receives provision naturally, someone who is a conduit through which abundance flows. That signal is so powerful, so disruptive to the old pattern, that it literally cannot coexist with the borrowing identity you've been carrying. Now I want you to feel the weight of these specific words, because they're not arbitrary. When you stand in that morning light and declare, "Today I am a channel of abundant provision. Money comes to me without begging. I receive it because I am worthy," something shifts in the invisible architecture of your reality. That word channel is crucial because it moves you from being a desperate container trying to grab and hold onto scraps to being an open conduit that allows wealth to flow through you. Channels don't struggle. They don't beg. They simply remain open and allow the flow. When you say, "Money comes to me without begging," you're severing the neural connection between financial need and humiliation. You're declaring that provision and dignity can coexist, that you don't have to sacrifice one to access the other. And when you end with, "I receive it because I am worthy," you're addressing the deepest wound that keeps most people trapped in poverty consciousness, the belief that they don't deserve abundance, that wealth is for other people, that they're somehow fundamentally unqualified for prosperity. These 3 sentences, spoken with intention in that sacred morning window, create an opening in your consciousness. It's like a door that's been locked for years, suddenly swinging open. And through that door, the flow of finances begins to move in ways that your rational mind cannot orchestrate or control. This is where faith meets neuroscience, where ancient wisdom meets modern psychology, where your decision to speak differently creates tangible change in your material experience. Write in the comments, "I am a channel of abundance." What happens next is subtle, but absolutely transformative. And most people miss it because they're looking for dramatic external changes, while the real revolution is happening internally. You become a different kind of person energetically, not in some vague, mystical way, but in a tangible shift that others can sense even if they can't articulate it. When you move from being the asker to being the receiver, when you step out of the identity of someone who needs rescue and into the identity of someone who naturally attracts provision, you place yourself into an entirely new financial reality. Money, opportunities, collaborations, they all move towards certain types of energy and away from others. When you're vibrating at the frequency of desperation, when you're emanating need and lack, people instinctively pull away. They might help you once out of compassion, but they don't want to partner with you, invest in you, or bring you into their circles because desperation is energetically draining. But when you shift into the receiver identity, when you carry yourself as someone who expects provision as a natural state rather than as an emergency rescue, everything changes in how people perceive and respond to you. This is the hidden truth behind why some individuals seem to effortlessly attract financial opportunities while others work twice as hard and struggle twice as much. It's not about who deserves it more or who's more talented. It's about energetic positioning, about the signal you're broadcasting through your presence, your words, and your morning consciousness. When you declare provision every morning before fear can establish its grip, you're essentially tuning yourself to a different station, and what plays on that station is completely different from what plays on the scarcity channel. Prosperous families understand this instinctively, which is why they teach their children to declare rather than complain, to speak what they want rather than rehearse what they lack. They know that money doesn't flow toward fearful, complaining, anxious energy. Money flows toward confidence, clarity, and the kind of calm certainty that comes from knowing you're provided for, regardless of current circumstances. This isn't about faking confidence or pretending you're not struggling. It's about accessing a deeper truth that exists beneath the surface turbulence of your current financial situation. When you practice declaration over complaint, you're training your nervous system to operate from a different baseline. Instead of waking up and mentally listing everything that's wrong, every bill that's due, every shortage that exists, you're consciously choosing to speak what you're calling into existence. That choice, repeated daily, becomes the difference between someone who spends their entire life reacting to scarcity and someone who creates abundance through intentional focus. Write in the comments, "I declare, not complain." Now let me explain something that will give you hope even if you've tried and failed at changing your financial situation before. There's a specific reason why these 3 sentences, when spoken consistently at dawn, can imprint into your brain like permanent new programming. Your brain forms habits through a process called neuroplasticity, where repeated actions literally create new neural pathways. But here's what most people don't know. The speed and strength of that pathway creation depends entirely on when and how you practice. Dawn is not just poetic timing, it's strategic. Your brain is in a theta to alpha wave transition, which means your subconscious is exceptionally receptive to new programming. When you speak these declarations in that window, they bypass your critical thinking faculty and go straight into the operating system. And neurological research shows that it takes approximately 7 days of consistent practice to begin disrupting an old habit pattern and installing a new one. 7 days, not 7 months, not 7 years. 1 week of committed morning declaration can start rewriting financial habits you've carried for decades, but you have to understand what's actually being rewritten. This goes deeper than just changing your morning routine. What you're addressing is the root cause of your financial struggle, and it's not what you've been taught to believe. Your constant money anxiety, the recurring debt, the sense of never having enough, None of that is actually caused by the absence of money itself. I know that sounds counterintuitive when you're looking at an empty account, but stay with me. Debt is not born from lack of money. Debt is born from the presence of a dangerous verbal pattern that you've been repeating unconsciously for years, maybe your entire life. Every time you said, "I can't afford it," you were programming lack. Every time you spoke about how tight things are, you were creating more tightness. Every conversation where you rehearsed your financial struggles was actually reinforcing those struggles at the neurological level. Your mouth has been your biggest financial liability, not because you talk too much, but because you've been using it to declare the wrong reality. You've been speaking yourself into poverty while thinking you were just describing your situation. This is the revelation that changes everything, because if verbal patterns created the problem, then verbal patterns can solve it. The 3 sentences I've given you are designed to interrupt years of destructive speech and replace it with creative speech. When you speak them for 7 consecutive mornings, you're not just being positive. You're performing surgery on your financial consciousness, cutting away the diseased tissue of lack-based language and grafting in the healthy tissue of provision-based declaration. Write in the comments, "My words are creating wealth." I need you to really let this sink in, because it's the key that unlocks everything. You haven't been trapped by your circumstances. You've been trapped by your declarations. All those times you said, "I don't have enough." All those conversations where you talked about being broke, being short, struggling to make ends meet, those weren't just innocent observations about your reality. They were commands. And your subconscious mind, which doesn't distinguish between description and instruction, took those commands and said, "Understood. We're someone who doesn't have enough. Let me make sure everything we do aligns with that identity." Every "I can't afford this" became a filter that made you blind to creative solutions. Every "I'm always short" became a self-fulfilling prophecy that your brain worked tirelessly to prove true. Every "money doesn't come easy to me" became a belief that shaped how you showed up in negotiations, how you priced your work, how you responded to opportunities. Your mind manifested exactly what you declared, not because it wanted to punish you, but because it was loyally following the instructions you kept giving it through your words. This is perhaps the most empowering and simultaneously devastating realization you can have. Your mouth has been financing your struggles far more than your income ever has. Think about that. The words leaving your lips every single day have had more impact on your financial reality than the numbers on your paycheck. You could double your income tomorrow, and if your mouth is still speaking poverty, you'll find a way to be broke at a higher income level. But you could keep your current income and change what you speak. And suddenly, that same amount of money starts working differently because you're working with it differently. Your words literally shape your world. They create the lens through which you see opportunities or obstacles. They determine whether you walk into a room as someone who has value to offer or someone who needs something from others. They establish your financial identity long before any money ever changes hands. When you meet someone who could potentially hire you, partner with you, or invest in you, they're not primarily responding to your resume. They're responding to the energy you carry, and that energy is shaped by the words you've been speaking to yourself when no one else is listening. This is why changing your morning declaration isn't a superficial fix. It's addressing the manufacturing plant where your financial identity gets produced every single day. When you take control of what leaves your mouth in those first 30 seconds, you're taking control of the entire production line of your financial reality. Write in the comments, "I control my declarations now." There's something happening beneath the surface every time you borrow money that most people never become aware of until it's too late. You think you're just borrowing currency, a temporary exchange that will be reversed when you pay it back. But what's actually happening is far more insidious. You're borrowing helplessness. You're surrendering a piece of your dignity, and each time you do it, regardless of how brief the loan or how quickly you repay it, it leaves an invisible scar on your self-image that changes how you see yourself at the most fundamental level. These scars accumulate. The first time you borrow, you tell yourself it's just this once, an emergency, an exception. But that exception creates a neural pathway, a precedent in your mind that says, when pressure comes, I am someone who needs rescue from others. The second time reinforces that pathway, the third time deepens it, and before you realize what's happening, borrowing has become part of your identity, woven into the fabric of how you navigate financial pressure. You've unconsciously accepted that you're not the kind of person who figures things out independently, but rather the kind who reaches out for help. When things get tight, what makes this particularly devastating is that it's not just psychological. Recent studies have revealed something that validates what people have felt but couldn't name. Approximately 80% of individuals who frequently borrow money develop genuine neurological patterns of reliance. This isn't metaphorical dependency. This is physical rewiring in the brain, where neural networks literally become structured around the expectation of external rescue. Your brain, in its attempt to keep you safe and reduce anxiety, starts defaulting to "who can I ask?" rather than "what can I create?" when financial pressure appears. This neurological dependency operates below conscious awareness, which is why people often can't understand why they keep repeating the pattern even when they desperately want to stop. It's not a character flaw or a lack of willpower. It's that your brain has been trained through repetition that borrowing is the solution to financial pressure, and now it automatically fires those neural pathways when stress appears. The more you've borrowed in the past, the stronger those pathways become, and the harder it is to access your creative problem-solving abilities, because your brain is literally wired to look outward for rescue rather than inward for resourcefulness. Understanding this changes everything, because it means you're not fighting against your circumstances or your bad luck. You're fighting against your own neurology, and you can't win that fight with willpower alone. You need to rewire the pathways, and that rewiring happens through consistent morning declaration that creates new neural networks stronger than the old ones. Write in the comments, "I'm rewiring my brain now." Ancient wisdom understood something about borrowing that modern society has completely forgotten, and it's captured in one simple but profound observation. The one who borrows becomes a servant to the lender. Not temporarily, not just until the debt is repaid. In that moment of asking, in that transaction where you extend your hand for rescue, something shifts in the power dynamic that goes far beyond the financial exchange. You place yourself in a subordinate position energetically, psychologically, and spiritually. Borrowing doesn't just restrict your finances by adding another obligation to your list. It imprisons your identity. It changes how you carry yourself in the world. Think about how you feel when you see someone you owe money to. That slight contraction in your chest, that impulse to avoid eye contact or change your path, that sense of being smaller, less than, indebted, not just financially, but existentially. That's your energetic presence being compromised. You can't show up powerfully in the world when you're walking around carrying invisible chains of debt that remind you with every encounter that you're someone who needed rescue. This is why breaking free from borrowing isn't just about getting your finances in order. It's about reclaiming your sovereign identity, your right to walk through the world with your head up, your energy expansive, your presence uncompromised by the weight of owing others. And that reclamation begins not with paying off every debt, which could take years, but with changing the declaration you make every single morning about who you are and how provision flows to you. When you stand in that morning light and recite those 3 sentences, you need to understand what's actually happening. You're not just praying in the traditional sense of asking some external power for help. You're issuing a divine decree. You're speaking with the authority of someone who understands they have co-creative power with the universe. You're announcing to every level of reality, seen and unseen, conscious and subconscious, that you are no longer available for the old pattern. You're declaring a new identity into existence, and that declaration carries weight because it's being spoken from the deepest part of your being in the most receptive moment of the day. This is simultaneously a spiritual practice and a neurological reboot. You're reformatting your mental hard drive and installing new operating instructions. And here's what's beautiful and terrifying about this. Once your language genuinely shifts, once you consistently speak provision instead of lack, independence instead of dependency, worthiness instead of shame, your life has absolutely no choice but to follow. Reality rearranges itself to match your declaration because you've changed the frequency you're broadcasting. Write in the comments, "I issue my decree today." So here we are at the end of this conversation, and if you're still with me right now, that tells me something important about you. You're not just casually browsing content. You're genuinely ready for change. You're someone who's willing to sit through truth even when it's uncomfortable, because you know that comfort is what's kept you stuck. I want you to know that this channel exists for people exactly like you, people who are done with surface-level advice and ready for the kind of transformation that actually rewires how you think, speak, and show up in the world. If that resonates with you, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button right now. Not because I need another number, but because you need a consistent place that reminds you daily of the power you carry and the financial dignity that's your birthright. And if this message landed in your spirit the way I think it did, drop a comment right now that says, "This message was meant for me." I read every single comment. And there's something powerful about publicly declaring your commitment to this journey. It makes it real in a way that silent agreement never does. If you found value here, if something clicked into place while you were listening, go ahead and leave a like on this video. It helps this message reach others who are trapped in the same cycles you're breaking free from, and honestly, it lets me know this conversation mattered to you. Now, there's another video right here that goes even deeper into how to maintain this transformation once you've started it, how to handle the moments when the old patterns try to pull you back. Click on it and continue this journey with me over there. Your financial breakthrough is waiting, and it starts with the next 30 seconds of tomorrow morning. I'll see you in the next one.